It's a video special from the Mossad Files, the weekly audio podcast about strategic issues in the Middle East, especially regarding Israel. And in this episode, we'll talk about the Palestinian issue in the wake of the Gaza war, or some say there still is a Gaza war. I'm Dan Raviv, co-author of 6 books about Israeli intelligence, strategy, and diplomacy, host of that weekly podcast, the Mossad Files. And we're joined by a guest who knows this subject inside out. Ghaith al-Omari, you are a scholar at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Ghaith al-Omari, I thank you for joining us from Washington. I do have one question. I need a reminder. I feel that a couple of decades ago, you worked for the Palestinian Authority as an advisor to one of their negotiating teams, right?
Thanks, Dan. First of all, great to see you. And yes, I worked for the Palestinian Authority both as an advisor and a member of the negotiating team, but also an advisor to the President and Prime Minister on foreign policy and national security affairs.
Now, in all fairness, are you now very independent when we talk about the various Palestinian factions? You're an independent player now, aren't you?
That was 20 years ago. Now I'm working for an American organization, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And, my views range from supporting some positions, but also critical of other Palestinian positions. I work as an analyst now.
All right. Now, there wasn't much of a Palestinian presence at a very important meeting. I thought it was a watershed event at the U.S. Institute of Peace. President Trump was leading his new Board of Peace. Right? People came from about 24 nations, sometimes the head of government, sometimes foreign ministers, and they were talking about Gaza. They would like to rebuild and resolve the Gaza dispute. This Board of Peace is Donald Trump's creation. He spoke there, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, his trusted negotiator, Steve Witkoff, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, and then these foreign leaders, some of whom pledged money, billions of dollars pledged. Trump said $10 billion from the U.S. for the activities of the Board of Peace, starting with Gaza, might expand into other parts of the world. So your overall impression, do we have now an international, multinational effort to change things in the Gaza Strip, to make things better, truly unlike anything anybody did in the past?
Look, I am optimistic. I look at it positively, but I also with a measure of maybe humility and less ambition than the president presented. Meaning, the meeting yesterday was certainly important. The meeting started clarifying the overall direction that we're going in Gaza when they talked about rebuilding the Rafah area in southern Gaza in 3 years, rebuilding Gaza completely in 10 years. They talked about a military force. They talked about money pledges. That's good. Yet there are also signs that that advise us to be cautious. For example, you look at the composition of the Board of Peace. Yes, heavy regional participation, almost no European participation, no Canadians, none of the kind of Western countries. That is not a reassuring sign as we move forward, both because those countries are important politically, also because they ultimately have to contribute in terms of finance, in terms of participation. You look at who attended yesterday, and as you pointed out, yes, some heads of state, but from the region, only one head of state, the King of Bahrain. Other countries sent foreign ministers. Saudi Arabia did not even send a foreign minister. They sent Adel Jubair, very talented diplomat, yet not the foreign minister. So this shows you that people are not fully on board. Then you look at the deliverables. Yes, a lot of money was pledged. Yet pledges do not always translate into deliverables. So let's talk again when the checks are in the bank, literally in the World Bank.
And would you agree, Ghaith, the conditionality wasn't specified, right? They didn't say we'll only give the money when Hamas disarms, when the IDF pulls back, et cetera, et cetera. We don't know.
We don't, though, again, we started seeing indicators. For example, the Saudis said, we will give money to alleviate suffering and to achieve long-term goals. Now, in diplomatic language, what this means is we're not going to be putting money for the reconstruction of Gaza, for the operations of the Board of Peace. We'll be putting money for humanitarian, and maybe once we see a pathway to a Palestinian state, we'll contribute. So there's a lot of parsing that you need to do. Yet, I don't want to be too pessimistic. And I will repeat that they were there, they pledged this money, but really, as they say, the devil or maybe God is in the details, and much will depend on whether or not we will see these things translate into operational issues. And to see, frankly, the core issue that you alluded to, the issue of Hamas disarmament, was also fuzzed. You know, the president was very clear. Nikolai Mladenov, who was the, let's say, the CEO of the Board of Peace, was very clear. Arab countries were very silent about it. So it tells you there's a lot that still needs to be worked out, but at least this is a beginning.
Well, Turkey and Qatar were there to the discomfort of many Israeli officials who certainly don't want Turkish and Qatari forces in the Gaza Strip. So, we'll see how that plays out and to what extent those countries can be involved. Now, those countries, and I'm taking a step back, beyond Thursday's meeting, sometimes Turkey and Iraq are thought of as supporters of Hamas. Obviously, Hamas political leadership has spent years in Doha, Qatar. Turkey is supportive and has meetings with Hamas. So if we think about the lineup, it's like Hamas had friends in the room, and President Trump made a point of saying Hamas did, in good faith, search for the final hostages, for the dead Israeli hostages. You have to give Hamas credit for that. The U.S. never used to give a terrorist group credit. So we don't really have firm stands on some of the important issues.
Even more than that, I would say. I mean, first of all, I fully agree with the view that that Qatar and Turkey are Hamas backers. We know this financially, even though it should be said that Israel also wanted Qatar to pay Hamas at least civilian salaries, but it goes beyond that. They're also politically supportive of Hamas. You know, President Erdogan of Turkey insists that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. They are quote unquote freedom fighters. So, and these are the most prominent actors. And yesterday, in the meeting of the Board of Peace, the president went out of his way to say that Qatar are not evil, they're good guys. So, and to the point of Hamas, and I really want to stress this point, I am very worried that we're seeing an erosion of an American position in terms of, looking at Hamas firmly as a terrorist organization. It's not only what the president said in that meeting. For the first time, we have, non-intelligence office American officials engaging with Hamas publicly. In the past, there were maybe some intelligence channels. That's normal. Yet, when you see Steve Witkoff, the president's trusted top negotiator around the world, meeting with Hamas officials publicly, and then going on 60 Minutes and saying, we connected on a human level. This is alarming. This is alarming in terms of American positions, but also creating a space for other countries to start flirting with Hamas. I'm hearing reports of some European countries saying, hey, the Americans are talking to them. Why shouldn't we talk to them? So there's a lot of kind of concerns, and the Israelis, and not only the Israelis, by the way, many Arab countries are worried about this. A country like the United Arab Emirates, which sees Hamas not only as a local terrorist organization, but also a part of the larger political Islam and terror wave, are very, very uncomfortable with this.
Well, all the foreign representatives at the meeting in Washington, D.C., had a chance to give brief speeches, including Israel's foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, one of the last speakers, by the way. Netanyahu didn't come. It's rather complex because he was at the White House just last week trying to influence President Trump on the Iran decision, whether to attack or not. Netanyahu did say last week, we also discussed Gaza, but it wasn't the top of the agenda from Netanyahu's point of view. So Foreign Minister Sa'ar was there. And the Israeli stand, frankly, is that there cannot be reconstruction in Gaza and a change toward something, again, indefinite, who's going to be in charge, how will it be policed, will Hamas be disarmed, until Hamas is disarmed. The IDF, the Israeli army, apparently not intending to pull back, and Israel still taking that strong stand, which could become increasingly unpopular. Would you agree? If Israel looks like it's the bump in the road, the spoke in the wheel, stopping Trump's proud Board of Peace plan.
Look, again, there are so many angles to this. I mean, at one angle, I would say there is a disconnect between diplomatic speak and reality. Yes, Israel maybe was the odd one out in terms of linking reconstruction to disarmament. Yes, that's in diplomatic terms. Yet, in reality, every Arab country I know, and many European countries that I speak to, basically will tell you, diplomacy aside, we know, and we will not put money for Gaza reconstruction as long as Hamas is there. Why? Because in reality, if Hamas continues to be armed, then the next round of fighting is inevitable. If not in 6 months' time, then in 2 years' time. No one wants to pour billions into Gaza just to see it destroyed again. So that, I mean, that's no matter even if in diplomatic terms, some of those donor countries are not on board. In reality, they would be on board. Yet, you raised an interesting point here. Israel is emerging more and more as maybe a spoiler in this. The president really wants things to move forward. At least he wants the appearance of things to move forward. And the fact that Israel continues, for its own, sometimes very valid reasons, to basically say no, puts it as kind of the spoiler. And there is a concern here that the more that countries like Qatar and Turkey, who are Hamas supporters, but also Saudi Arabia, which is concerned with the current Israeli government, have the ear of the president, we'll start seeing more and more daylight and schism between Israel and the United States. So there's a lot of at stake as things progress.
You know, some
By the way,
commentators said,
to
well, I want to
add
point
here,
this out. Some commentators said that at Thursday's meeting, there was some actually said there was no Palestinian voice there, but not exactly true, right? The Palestinian technocrat who has already convened the NCAG, I believe that's the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza, to be financed by the Board of Peace. They had a meeting in Cairo. There are actual Palestinians. That man, you can fill me in with the name, I apologize, gave a little speech about his plan to recruit a police force, claimed 2,000 volunteers already would like to be in the new police force. It was a short speech, but it was optimistic.
I mean, look, first of all, I feel very, very strongly against those people who are saying there was no Palestinian representation. And I see this narrative coming from Hamas, who wants to discredit this national committee. You know, we call it the NCAG, another acronym to remember in this conflict. It's coming from the Palestinian Authority that's afraid that if this NCAG succeeds in creating clean, effective government, it will become a competitor. And it's coming from some activists who basically want everything maximalist. This NCAG, and particularly its leader, Ali Shaath, someone that I have known for many, many years, these are, first of all, I would say patriots. They're coming into it because they want what's best for Gaza. And these are effective, clean people. These are not the corrupt types that we're used to, and none of them is tainted by terror. So I do believe there was a Palestinian voice. I do believe that it's wrong to say that there was no Palestinian representation, because those who say they want Palestinian representation either want Hamas, which I think is absolutely disastrous, or the PA that no one trusts. We have a Palestinian voice. The challenge today would this Palestinian voice, this NCAG, will they have the tools to be able to operate? And the tools are financial. Will they have some of this money that was pledged? The tools are security. They talked about, I think, 2 or 3 thousand, I can't remember, police being coming in a couple of months. Will Israel allow them to come in with the right kind of equipment, armament, etc.? If we do, and if those guys succeed, I don't think it's only important for Gaza. This can present a new model of Palestinian governance that I think can challenge both the failed models that Hamas and the PA present, and maybe give the Palestinians something to rally around. So I do think that this is an opportunity and a moment where Palestinian governance can actually be revived in ways that we can all subscribe to.
Well, let's talk about the real needs, right? 2 million Palestinian residents of the Gaza Strip, so many, maybe a majority, would you agree, are homeless, right? Homes were damaged or destroyed in the long war. Israel said it was committed to destroying Hamas, making sure Hamas can never run Gaza again and can never attack Israel again. You know, all of this sparked by the October 7th attack in 2023 that changed everything, right? Israel decided to be stronger than ever, more brutal than ever in hitting its enemies in the Gaza Strip. So, of course, civilians were hit and killed and made homeless. So there's so much to do to help non-combatants. This is something the world can't ignore, right? Even if Britain, France, Germany were not at this board of peace, right? The world is going to have to help rebuild the Gaza Strip, yes?
Oh, absolutely. Yet, like everything, the goal might be lofty, but the tools are complicated. But let me maybe start with just maybe a note, historical note. October 7th, the attack by Hamas was a terrorist attack by any definition. No country, no country will be attacked this way and can be expected to sit idly. Israel had every right to respond. Yet at the same time, just because you have the right to respond doesn't mean you have the right to respond in an excessive way. And there was no doubt that there were Israeli excesses in this war. And I think a lot, as we look in the future, I think hinges on the extent to which Israel can do its own reckoning. That's a domestic political Israeli issue about what happened, what went wrong, where there was excesses, and whether Israel will hold some of those who were participants in this excess to account. This remains to be seen. But back to the question of reconstruction. Look, first of all, as I looked at the meeting of the Board of Peace, I felt there was a disconnect between reality and between diplomatic speak. Someone, I can't remember who, maybe I think Kushner talked about building 200 hotels. Someone talked about high-speed internet. Wait a minute. The majority of Gazans today live in tents. 80% of homes were either fully destroyed or destroyed to an extent that they are no longer usable. Unexploded ordnance, unexploded bombs everywhere. Before we talk about fancy hotels and high-speed internet, let's talk about rebuilding the water system and the sewage system and maybe upgrading the housing condition from tents to mobile homes, something like this. You need to be realistic. If this is going to be succeeding, you need to respond not to the kind of glitzy donor world. You need to respond to the actual need of Gazans. This is both a cursing and a blessing. It's a blessing because it means the bar is low. And if you give Gazans today even basic needs, they will actually rally around whoever gives them this needs. But it's also a curse because at the end of the day, many countries, as we said before, will not come in unless there is Hamas disarmament. It is complicated. Yet the Hamas disarmament is also not easy. Let's be frank. I mean, 2 years into the war, Israel has failed to do that. Disarmament is a difficult thing. You expect the international community to come in. No country wants to send its young men and women to die on foreign soil. No one. It's not only an American issue. No one wants to do it. So there are real complexities that we have to look into. At the end of the day, in my view, no one can do that but the Palestinians themselves, which is another reason to back and strengthen and support this NCAG and its other capabilities.
All right, as an alternative to two large factions, if you will, Hamas, that's been governing Gaza, so to speak, since 2006. The Israelis had left in 2005. And Hamas has been growing in the West Bank, but the West Bank, the Palestinian administration, is an outgrowth of the old al-Fatah faction, of course, of the late Yasser Arafat. Okay, we got the basic players. I'm wondering, how can the West Bank be affected by what happens in Gaza? Some Israelis say, oh, there has to be a clear lesson that if the Palestinians commit a major act of violence and murder and kidnappings, October 7th, the lesson has to be that won't succeed. Hamas must not look like a winner. That's very difficult, of course. So how does that affect the West Bank, where you say Palestinian people broadly don't trust the PA, they don't trust the aging Mahmoud al-Abbas, the president of the PA? How does the Gaza outcome affect an even bigger Palestinian population, that is to say, the West Bank?
Let me start with the negative and move to the positive. I mean, on the negative note, because I mean, understandably, all focus right now is on Gaza. The magnitude of both the disaster and the task ahead is huge. But because of this focus, no one's paying attention to what's happening in the West Bank, and bad things are happening in the West Bank. Violence by a subset of Israeli settlers there grows, and it grows with growing impunity from Israeli forces. This is creating a real sense of insecurity in the West Bank. And people are feeling, look, if the Palestinian Authority can't protect us, maybe we should go and support Hamas. That could actually, hit back when the Israelis attack. So the situation in the West Bank is deteriorating from a security point of view, even though the Palestinian Authority continues to cooperate in a security level with Israel. We're seeing downward trends. Recently, there were political decisions to transfer some authorities from the Israeli military to the Israeli civilian authorities. I'm not going to go into the legal complications of this, enough to say that this raised alarm that we might be seeing de facto annexation in the West Bank. This has implications for the West Bank itself, but also implications for Israel's relations with some of its Arab peace partners like Jordan, Egypt, even the United Arab Emirates. So it's important to pay attention to the West Bank. That's on the negative. On the positive, though, and I go back to a point I raised earlier. The Palestinians today, if you zoom out and if you look at Palestinian public opinion, today the Palestinians have no trust in any of their political leaders. They don't trust Hamas because Hamas failed and not only failed in Gaza, but brought disaster to Gaza. They have no faith in the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, the party behind it, because they're corrupt, they're ineffectual, they're useless, they're authoritarian, etc. If we have a success in Gaza with this NCAG being able, first and foremost, to deliver to the people, but also to deliver in clean, transparent, non-corrupt ways, then the Palestinians may start having saying, you know what, we have a government structure that we can actually trust. So a lot is at stake here, not only for Gaza, but also for the future of Palestinian politics and Palestinian governance. We succeed in Gaza, we can start creating a hope for something better. We fail in Gaza, we reinforce the sense of despair and despondency among Palestinians. And I don't need to to remind you that with despair comes radicalization.
Mm. Take the last 2 minutes, if you will, for a wider question, though it does have to do with Jared Kushner's plan for peace in the Middle East, if you will, his vision of what the Palestinians could have in the year 2020 boiled down to prosperity. That's the way I saw it. He said there'd be investment in job creation zones and factories. And yes, eventually that became an idea of hotels and coastal development in Gaza. But there never was much talk, still isn't, from Jared Kushner on whether there can be an independent, sovereign state of Palestine, a nation. Do you think all plans fail if they don't at least envision true independence and sovereignty for Palestinians?
Let me start by saying, look, we tend in this conflict to focus on an either or, either only diplomacy or only prosperity. The reality is you need both. Diplomacy that's not grounded in changes in people's actual lived experience will fail. We've seen it. That's when I was a negotiator. That's what we used to do, and we failed. The flip also fails. If you think of prosperity without a political component, you'll also fail. To think of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as an economic conflict, not one of nationalist political dimensions, you will also fail. Not only fail domestically, you will fail regionally. Look, the Abraham Accords, of which I'm a huge supporter, yet, because they did not actually touch the political issue, they continue to be suspect not only among Palestinians, but in the region. We see the most important Arab country today, Saudi Arabia, saying we're not going to go all in unless you give us a pathway to a Palestinian state. Why? Because they saw focusing only on economy ultimately failed, created October 7th and the war after that, which impacted their own interests. So without mixing the two, not only will you not have Palestinian buy-in, I fear you will not have full regional buy-in.
So there has to be more mention, at least, right, of a goal on the horizon that the Palestinians could win independence. And by the way, Trump's 20 points did have a brief mention of that possibility.
By the way, absolutely, and you hit the nail on the head, as it were, when you said there has to be mention. We all know There can be no Palestinian state tomorrow, or in 6 months, or a year or two. But you have to maintain the objective alive. Diplomacy is as much about framing and narrative as much as it is about deliverables. You need the end goal to remain there while being realistic. That can't happen tomorrow, but the focus today has to be on changing reality on the ground. But all of that has to be in service of a larger political goal. Otherwise, not only will you not have Arab participation, I would even say many European countries will also not play ball if they just are seen as maintaining a status quo that they believe is unsustainable.
Well, speaking about President Trump's Board of Peace, its first big meeting, and possible horizons for the future, that is Ghaith al-Omari with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, a former, years ago, Palestinian negotiator, now happy to say a very independent voice. And thanks for sharing your wisdom with us, Ghaith al-Omari.
Dan, always a pleasure. Thank you.
And my thanks to all of you for watching this video extra from the Mossad Files. Please keep in mind, every week there's a new audio podcast, the Mossad Files. You can find it on all the podcast platforms. Please tell your friends, download and subscribe. That's the Mossad Files. Also, my most recent book with my co-author Yossi Melman is Target Iran. It's an ebook, very affordable, and it's the true story of how the Mossad penetrated Iran over the years and setting up that 12-day war this past June. And Yossi Melman and I also wrote this wider history of the Mossad and other Israeli intelligence and security agencies. It's called Spies Against Armageddon: Inside Israel's Secret Wars by Raviv and Melman. Thanks again for watching. I'm Dan Raviv.